Okay, so thank you for joining in to this talk by the Olive Ridley Project. So my name is Claire, and I'm a sea turtle veterinarian, and I have been working for the Olive Ridley Project for the past few years. I spent 2 years working in Maldives, rehabilitating turtles at their rescue centre. So I'm giving this talk on behalf of Joe, who's one of our marine biologists, who does a lot of work with turtles out in the field. So sorry that it's not her giving this talk, but I'm sure she'll be around to answer questions as well at the end. So this presentation is going to be focused on sea turtles, their biology, and a bit about sort of the work that we're doing as a charity. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about sort of sea turtle biology. So turtles are a really ancient species. They've been around 120 million years since the Mesozoic era of the dinosaurs. They've been virtually unchanged in this time. So the leatherback turtle was swimming in our oceans whilst the T-Rex was walking on land. So they're a really incredible animal. And, you know, when we see them in the oceans, you can just imagine, you know, being in a different time period. They're marine reptiles. So reptiles are cold-blooded. They rely on the outside water temperature for their internal body temperature. So this is why we generally find them in the tropics, because it's warm water, so it keeps their bodies warm. They're not able to regulate their own body temperature. Now, the exception to this is the leatherback turtle, which I'll show you some pictures of in a minute. Leatherbacks actually have a type of brown fat that is found in mammals, so it's really unique to actually find this in a reptile, and it allows them to regulate their body temperature a little bit, so they're able to conserve heat. They also have something called countercurrent flow in their flippers, which again helps regulate their body temperature, and it allows them to swim sort of as far north as the Arctic. So anyone watching sort of from the Northern Hemisphere, the UK in particular, we can actually see leatherbacks off our coast. They can swim sort of as far north as us. So they have lungs and they breathe air. So they actually hold their breath, and they're incredibly well adapted to being able to dive and hold their breath underwater. They have very large lungs. They're able to store a lot of oxygen in their muscles, and they're very, very efficient at conserving oxygen. So their resting metabolic rate is very low. So where we burn up a lot of oxygen, turtles are actually really good at surviving off, you know, one breath at the surface. They can then hold their breath up to 8 hours. So there was a loggerhead in captivity that was, I think, the longest recorded dive was 7 to 8 hours. So really, really good at holding their breath. Definitely beat us on the free diving world records. I think the breath hold human record was 22 minutes by a German freediver. So yeah, they're really, really amazing animals. They're incredible divers, so they can dive up to about 1,300 meters. This is the diving world record is by the leatherback turtle. So they actually have a soft shell that can compress under pressure and allow them to dive to such depths, chasing after their favorite jellyfish food. They spend their whole life in open ocean. They're born on land, and the only time they ever return to land is the female turtles when they go to lay their eggs. Otherwise, they spend their whole life in the ocean. There's a couple of exceptions to this. So in certain parts of the world, such as Hawaii, you can see green turtles basking on the beaches in the sunshine, but this is generally an exception, and we tend not to see them on land unless they're nesting. They have scales on their skin, so they're like reptiles, and their shell is made out of something called scutes, which are these bony plates. The rib cage is sort of fused inside their shell, and their spines as well are fused to the shell. So they're all sort of encapsulated in this shell. The inside of them is just one cavity, so they don't have a diaphragm like us. They don't have a split between the intestines and the lungs. It's just all all inside that one shell cavity. They live between sort of 60 to 75 years on average, but they can live up to 100 years. So sort of a similar lifespan to us, really. It's very difficult to age turtles. We can't sort of, you know, count rings on their back or anything like that. So it's very difficult when we see an adult turtle in the wild to actually know how old it is. So potentially, you know, they are living more than 100 years in some cases. They are very slow to actually reach sexual maturity. So they can take anywhere between 10 and 45 years, depending on the species. Green turtles in particular can take up to 50 years to actually start reproducing and laying their eggs. So you can imagine they have to survive a really long time before they can reproduce. So 50 years they have to survive in the ocean, all the threats that they face, to get to the point where they can, you know, produce the next generation of turtles. So this is part of the reason that they are so endangered. All sea turtle species are listed on the endangered or vulnerable IUCN red list. So a bit about the life cycle of sea turtles. The female turtle, when she's old enough, will come onto the beach to lay her eggs, and she climbs up on the beach and she will dig a nest chamber. So this is about 1 meter deep, and she uses her back flippers to actually lay this, to actually dig the nest. This process can take, you know, up to 4 to 6 hours. It can take a really long period of time to actually dig the nest. She will then lay her eggs within the nest. They go into sort of a trance-like state. If you've ever seen videos or been lucky enough to actually see a turtle lay their eggs, at this point, you know, they're really sort of in this trance of egg laying. They deposit anywhere between 50 and 150 eggs in one nest, so a huge number of eggs deep down buried in the sand. And they also lay multiple clutches of eggs within the same breeding season. So they don't just come up and lay a few eggs and that's it. They will come back between 4 and 6 times during the breeding season to lay their eggs. This takes a huge amount of energy and reserve, so sea turtles generally don't nest every year. Most species will have a gap. They'll have a couple of years or a year between sort of breeding seasons, so it's not an annual thing for each turtle. So they then cover up the nest, and that's it. The female turtle's job is done in her eyes, and she will return to the ocean until it's time again to lay another nest of eggs. Those turtles, those eggs will take between sort of 40 to 70 days to hatch, and then it's a real team effort as they have to dig up out of that sand. So they're very small at this point, and they have to dig their way up out of 3 meters of sand within minutes of actually being hatched. So they have to work as a team to do this. They work their way up slowly, sort of collapsing the sand above them, and then the sand sort of keeps pushing them up. So after about 3 days of this struggle, using their energy reserves from the egg yolk, they actually emerge as a team. So this is why you see the whole nest of turtles arriving at the surface together. And once they're out, they make a mad dash. They have to get to the ocean as soon as possible so they can start feeding to rebuild that energy that they've just used over the last few days. So the baby turtles will make a mad dash for the water. They all hit the water, they take a big gulp of seawater, and this activates the salt glands. So these are little glands that live behind their eyes, and it allows them to live in such a salty environment that is the ocean. We as mammals and most other species will secrete salt through our kidneys. This is how we regulate salt in our bodies. We of course don't live in seawater, so turtles actually have really large salt glands behind their eyes, which allows them to secrete salt through their eyes, and they actually cry it out as tears. So if you do go to somewhere and you can see turtles nesting on beaches, you may see the females crying. They are not crying tears, they're not emotional about the part about to give birth, and they are in fact just secreting salty tears from the ocean. So they've hit the water and they start swimming out to open ocean. So in their first few years, they live in the pelagic zone of the ocean. So this is open water, far away from land. And we call these years the lost years because we have very little data on what they actually do with their time in these first few years and whereabouts they hang out. They will find like a life raft, which is made of sargassum or seaweed, and they float around in ocean currents, hiding under this seaweed, eating small things like algae, plankton, and they're just trying to grow as fast as possible, because the larger they are, the less at risk they are from other animals in the ocean. So once they're a bit bigger and they enter their sub-adult years, and this is different for every species, but this is sort of a generalization, they will tend to inhabit coastal areas in shallower water during that period of their life. So they enter sort of their foraging grounds, and they, you know, depending whether they're reef species or ocean species, they will sort of move around to eat food and continue to grow. And then as adults, of course, the cycle continues. So they will return to their breeding grounds, they will breed out in the ocean, and then the females will go back to land to lay their eggs. So a little bit about sort of survival rates to actually get to the point of being that adult turtle returning to land to nest. The survival rate is about 1 in 1,000. So out of those babies that make it out of the eggs, only 1 in 1,000 is going to actually survive to adulthood. That's why they lay so many eggs in a clutch and why there's multiple nests per year. It's just a game of sort of probability, is to try and get the amount of turtles to reach adulthood. So if we're talking about natural threats, which I'll come on to later, that's how they've adapted to sort of combat the natural threats they would face. But of course, when we add human pressures to those threats, we're reducing, you know, we're affecting this already small survival rate of the amount of adult turtles that we see in the ocean. So when you actually see an adult turtle, you can imagine the miracle it is that that turtle is that 1 in 1,000 that's actually survived to that point. It's really quite incredible. So there's 5 species of turtle found in the Maldives. There's 7 species in total, but 5 are sort of the most common that are found throughout the waters of most of the oceans. So there's the green sea turtle and the hawksbill. These are reef species. Reef meaning they live on coral reefs. So for diving and snorkeling, these are the species that we will see most frequently. The other 3 species live in open ocean. So you'd have to be very lucky or unfortunate enough to see an injured one that you would see these species. But of course, you know, occasionally people do run into them. The loggerhead, the leatherback, and the Olive Ridley. I'll go through each species in a minute and tell you a little bit more information on them. So we can actually identify the species of sea turtle by the number of scutes. So this is the plates on the outside edges of their shell. So particularly when they're first born and they're little hatchlings, they can look quite similar between the species, but we can count the number of scutes. So hawksbills and greens have 4 pairs of scutes on the side, and the other species have more than that. And then between the green and the hawksbill, they have different facial scales as well. So this is one of the ways we can tell them apart. Leatherbacks are completely unique. They don't actually have scutes like the others. They have this leathery skin, so they're very distinctive, even from when they're born. So here's a video of a green sea turtle. So green turtles, they actually get their name not because of their outside colour, but because their fat is very green in colour. So on the inside, they are green. Unfortunately, they are considered a delicacy in some parts of the world, and so the name sort of comes from the fat on the inside. They have sort of quite a rounded, sort of flattened carapace. They have a really beautiful shell, loads of patterns and colours on the shell, so they're a lovely turtle to encounter in the wild. They get quite big. They get to about 160 kilos and about 120 centimetres in length, so they're a very large turtle. And their diet is almost completely vegetarian, so they're herbivores. When they're adults, they feed almost entirely off seagrass, which causes the green colour of the fat that I mentioned earlier. When they're younger, they're a bit more omnivores. They have a bit of a broader diet, and even as adults, they will still eat jellyfish because this tends to be the favourite snack in the sea of most turtles. They are found in most oceans around the world: the Atlantic, the Pacific, the Indian, and the Mediterranean. So really quite widespread. And they are classed as endangered on the IUCN Red List. So these guys, their population numbers aren't doing so well, but fortunately are increasing in some places. So some populations that have conservation measures, there are some success stories of them seeing increase in populations. So on to the hawksbill. Hawksbill, they're another species of reef. So the green and the hawksbills are the reef species, but hawksbills are smaller than greens. So they are up to about 70 kilos as adults, and up to about 90 centimeters in shell length. They get their name because they have a really sharp beak, so their head's quite distinctive from the greens. The greens is quite round, whereas the hawksbills, they have this beak, which is an adaptation for their diet. So they eat corals and sponges off the reef. Some of the sponges they eat can be quite toxic, so it can then make them themselves sort of quite toxic. And again, unfortunately, when they are eaten in some parts of the world, they can cause sort of food poisoning because of this. They have overlapping scutes, so their scutes actually lie on top of each other. They're not side to side like the greens, and they're sort of a browny colour. They are actually, their shells are the source of tortoiseshell material as well. So the illegal trade of tortoiseshell, which fortunately isn't legal in many places now, but the shell comes from this type of turtle, from the hawksbill. This unfortunately is why their conservation status is critically endangered. So these guys are really rare, and we really need to work to try and conserve their numbers. They are, as well as the green, they're quite widely distributed, and they're found in the Pacific, the Atlantic, the Indian Oceans, and the Mediterranean Sea. And the majority of their life cycle is spent on coral reefs. So on to loggerhead turtles. Loggerhead turtles are named because they have a really large head. That's where they get their name. They have a really strong crushing beak, which is an adaptation for their diet of crustaceans and mollusks, and allows them to eat those sea animals. They're sort of a brownish colour. They have like a sort of heart-shaped shell, and these guys are quite big. They get to about 170 kilos, sometimes a bit bigger, and about 110 centimetres. They are distributed sort of in the Pacific, Indian, Atlantic Oceans, the Mediterranean Sea, and these guys are classed as vulnerable. Loggerheads are a pelagic species, so you won't find these on coral reefs. They tend to live out in the open ocean. So leatherbacks are the unique turtles of the species, and they're the only turtle that doesn't have a hard shell. So they have a leathery shell that encompasses their body, and this allows them to dive to really great depth. So this is an adaptation because it compresses under pressure. I think I mentioned that before. And these guys are really, really large. So they can get up to 3 meters. The largest leatherback turtle recorded was 916 kilos, so almost a ton this turtle weighed, and it washed up close to where I grew up in North Wales in the UK. And unfortunately that turtle died from fishing net, from plastic. So that was back, I think it was in the 70s, 80s. So unfortunately a victim of human errors, but that was the largest one to my knowledge that was ever found. Their diet consists almost exclusively of jellyfish, so they get to that size hunting jellyfish and sort of soft-shelled, soft-bodied animals in the ocean. These are the ones I was saying could thermoregulate a little bit, so they can keep their body temperature a little bit warmer than the outside ocean. So you can actually find them as far north as the Arctic and the southern tip of Africa. So these guys are really, really widely distributed, and they cover really large distances. So these are the big sort of migrating turtles, and they can swim large distances across the globe. Leatherbacks are classed as vulnerable on the IUCN Red List. So olive ridleys. Well, Ridley turtles in general are the smallest, one of the smallest species of turtle. They're pelagic, so they live in open water. And this video is taken from one of our guys in the rescue centre from Olive Ridley Project. So he was recovering from some injuries. They have sort of a greyish olive coloured shell, which is where they get their name from. The younger turtles are darker in colour, and then they tend to get a bit lighter as they get older. They have 6 or more lateral scoots on the side, so this is how we can identify them. And they get to about 45 kilos and 70 centimetres. These guys have a real varied diet. They're omnivores. They eat anything from crustaceans, fish, mollusks, jellyfish. So they are, yeah, they sort of eat many things that they can find in the ocean. They're not as fussy as the leatherback turtles, just eating their jellyfish. They have a really wide distribution again. They're found in the Pacific, Atlantic and Indian Oceans, but they're sort of distinct populations. So we'll have the Indian Ocean olives, which are a little bit smaller from their Pacific cousins. So they're found all over the world, but they sort of have their populations. They migrate within that ocean that they're found in. They're classed as vulnerable on the IUCN Red List. So they are the most abundant species of turtle, but they are still classed as vulnerable despite being more in numbers than some of the other species. They have a really unique nesting behaviour. So the other species of turtle nest individually, whereas olive ridleys can nest en masse. So there's an event called an arribada, and this is the Spanish term for arrival. And it's where hundreds of thousands of turtles arrive on the same beach at the same time. I think the record was something like 500,000 turtles in Costa Rica. And they lay millions of eggs over a 24-hour period. So it's really an incredible thing to see. If you look at videos online, you can just see all these turtles, and sometimes it can be a bit of a mess. One turtle's digging up the eggs from another turtle that they've just laid, but they've obviously adapted this way to potentially confer some advantage from all the babies, you know, at once sort of going to the ocean. We have no idea how they sort of communicate that now is the right time to go on the beach, but they all sort of arrive out the sea at the same time, and it seems to be linked with the moon cycles. So the final 2 species which aren't found in Maldives, there's the flatback turtle. So the flatback is exclusively found in Australia, and they are up to about 90 kilos and 100 centimetres. We don't have a huge amount of information on these turtles, so their conservation status is data deficient. We just don't have enough information on them yet, but they're omnivores, so they eat sort of jellyfish, sea cucumbers, mollusks and various things in the ocean. Then the one on the right is the Kemp's Ridley. The Kemp's is the cousin of the Olive Ridley, so they're sort of related, but they are separate species. And the Kemp's Ridley is the smallest species of sea turtle. So they only get to about 35-40 kilos and about 60-65 centimetres. And Kemp's Ridley are the most endangered of all the turtles, so they're critically endangered, and they're found sort of off the coast in the Atlantic Ocean, off the coast of America. So again, they are not found in other places of the world. They're quite a niche turtle. So on to some of the threats that they encounter. The largest threat to sea turtles is when they are just hatched. So on land, crabs, birds, fish in the sea, basically any fish that's predatory larger than a turtle is a risk to that little turtle. So that's why they have such a small survival rate, because everything will predate on them and will hunt them. As adults, the main natural threat would be sharks. So in the Maldives, we see tiger sharks that can hunt turtles. And that's sort of the only threat, really. Sharks can bite through the outer shell of an adult turtle, surprisingly. So the main threats, though, to sea turtles is actually human activity. So before, they had to combat surviving the hatchling stage. They've got fish, birds, crabs. When they get to adults, they still have to worry about sharks, and they've done that for, millions of years, but now in the last sort of 50 to 100 years, they have a new threat, and that's us as human beings, which they haven't been able to adapt to in such a short period of time. So from the stage of babies, they're kept as pets. So they're often taken from the wild in some places. They're kept in bathtubs. They're kept in plastic water bottles, buckets. You can imagine, people think they're quite cute and they want to keep them as pets. They're often not kept in great conditions, fresh water, unhygienic conditions. They're often fed really inappropriate things like sandwiches, things that turtles should not be eating. So of course this is really bad for them, and sort of bad for the species, for these baby turtles to be taken away from the wild. They're at risk to getting hit by boats. So sea turtles have to come up to the surface to breathe, and they also spend a portion of the day basking in the sunshine. So they need to absorb UV light, and they also need to heat up after those dives. They need to warm themselves up. So they will spend a period of time just kind of resting at the surface. Of course, if this is in the path of the boats, then they are incredibly vulnerable to having their shells damaged, and they can actually die from getting hit by the boats. So damaging habitat is, a big reason that they're endangered as well. So this is kind of twofold. So it's both the pollution of the oceans, when their natural habitat is damaged, sort of deep trawling of deep fishing trawling, which can sort of disturb the seabed, and shrimp populations can affect some species. Removing seagrass to build resorts, anything that can kind of damage the ocean habitat will affect their numbers, because we're affecting their feeding grounds essentially, and where they live. But as well as this, when we build near their nesting beaches, and we disturb the beaches that for the last million years they've used to lay their eggs, this is also affecting their population. So there's things like light and noise pollution. You will see where a resort or roads have been built near a nesting beach. When the turtles hatch, they get confused. They use the moonlight on the water to find their way to the ocean. But of course, if we have the blaring lights of a town next to that nesting beach, they're going to turn and go that way. So as well as this, if the actual beach is built on, the adult turtles can get entangled or lost kind of on their way to lay their eggs. So it's a really big problem, and unfortunately in some places is a big reason that the nesting populations are reducing. Plastic is a huge problem in our oceans. There's such a large amount of plastic that's lost into the ocean every year. It's affecting all marine life, not just turtles. And what happens is they can become entangled in this plastic, or they can actually ingest it, whether this is by accident or whether it is because they think it looks like jellyfish. So there was a study that showed they will actually preferentially eat white bags over other coloured plastic, presumably because that looks more like a jellyfish. So when they eat the plastic, it will then fill up their stomach. They can obviously get major health conditions from having this plastic inside, or they just feel full and they don't want to eat anything else, and they can sort of waste away. So really, really, horrible thing for them to have to encounter. Fishing gear is a really huge problem in our ocean, and I'll come on to it more in a second, because it's a big part of the work that we do is the Olive Ridley Project. So there's two sides sort of the fishing industry and how it affects marine life. One, which is very widely talked about, is bycatch. So when fishing boats go out with the big nets, and you know, they will catch all the species non-discriminately, everything gets caught in the nets and unfortunately loses their lives. But the other side to that is ghost gear, which is what happens to the nets after they're finished using them. They often get dumped back into the ocean and can cause lots of issues. Finally, they are also eaten in many parts of the world. So both the turtles and the eggs, they can be considered a delicacy. Fortunately, some of the laws are changing now, and it's starting to be illegal in some countries, but it can be such a big part of a culture that it's very difficult to actually change people's habits about eating them. So they are unfortunately poached still. So a bit about the Maldivian legislation. So we actually have a big project working in Maldives to protect the turtles there. The turtles actually are protected under Maldivian law, and it's illegal to hunt them, either the eggs or the adult turtles, or take them for pets or trade them in any way. But unfortunately, this does sort of still happen. It's something we're really working as a charity to increase education. It's absolutely amazing to have a law to, you know, protect wildlife, but it's also really important to sort of try and change the way people view these animals, and, you know, so people understand why, you know, we should be protecting them and not poaching them. So ghost nets is a term that means abandoned, discarded or lost fishing nets. So it's what happens to fishing nets at the end of their life. So perhaps they break or they're no longer useful and they get thrown back into the ocean. So back in the old days, they would be made out of decomposable materials, you know, potentially wouldn't cause as much damage as they do now. But now they're made out of plastic. So this means they're not decomposing. So plastic takes hundreds, if not more amount of years to actually decompose. So you can imagine a net being in the ocean for that amount of time. The nets constantly float around, catch marine life. They can injure them, kill them, all species. They don't, you know, discriminate which species they catch. Once the animals in the net die, decompose, the nets just continue to float around in the ocean. So hundreds of thousands of nets are lost into the ocean every year. And this is just adding to the nets that are already there. So, you know, these nets aren't going anywhere. The only way we can really combat this, firstly, is to stop the nets getting into the ocean in the first place, and by physically removing the nets that are already in there. So they're really, you know, sort of silent killers. So it's called ghost fishing because no one's attached to this net. There's no, you know, purpose to this fishing. They're just floating around and harming our marine life. And it's something that not everyone knows about. You know, they don't know that this is a big problem going on in our oceans. In Maldives alone, so such a small country, there's been 800 turtles found sort of in the last 5 years entangled in ghost gear, and they're the ones that have been found. So Maldives is a collection of, you know, potentially a couple of hundred inhabited islands floating in the middle of the Indian Ocean. So these are turtles that people have happened to found, and that was already 800 in the last 5 years. So that basically what happens is these nets float around in currents from various places in the world's oceans. So there may be some countries, some areas that have large fishing industries, and the fish nets might get into the ocean there from that source, but they will then float around to other places of the world. So Maldives don't actually fish using fishing nets. They fish using pole and line technique, which is a really sustainable form of fishing. But unfortunately, despite that, they get a huge number of ghost nets popping up in that country because they're floating from other parts of the world. So this is an example of a ghost net that was recovered from an island in Maldives, and you can just see the weight of it. I mean, it takes a crane to lift this. They can weigh tons of groups of fishing nets. And yes, this presentation is about turtles, but it's not just turtles these nets are entangling. We found sharks in them, dolphins, whales. In the UK, there's problems with seals becoming entangled. I've seen seals with ghost nets around them, and it's heartbreaking, because it's just something that shouldn't be happening from our activity. So this is just a video to really highlight the problem. This was a ghost net and a turtle entangled in Maldives. There's some tarpaulin in there, and you can just see that it's really impossible for them to get out. So they swim into these nets, whether they think that it's a resting place, or what can happen is the fishing nets can collect little fish around them. So the animals actually go up there to feed, and then they become entangled in all of these nets. So they can become these little kind of ecosystem traps that large animals will then go in because they see something trapped. Then they themselves become trapped. So it's really difficult. And just due to their anatomy, they have no way of escaping in many cases, and they will just continuously swim against these nets until they either sort of drown or they lose a flipper, or fortunately, in the case of this turtle, was found by some people. She was released from the net and, hopefully went on to a normal life. And this fishing net was also taken out of the ocean. So this turtle was called Coco, and she actually washed up on the island of Coco Palm Dunikolu in Bar Atoll, Maldives. And this was the island where our rescue centre is based. So we have a sea turtle rescue and rehabilitation centre and a veterinary clinic. And this is, where this turtle actually washed up and was able to go straight into our rescue centre to be helped as much as possible. Another example was this turtle that was, in the net, and you can see in that, apologies for the quite heartbreaking picture on the right, and that's actually a humerus bone, so the arm bone of a sea turtle, and the net is just completely wound around that bone. So that turtle did not make it out with the same way she entered that net. She either lost a flipper or potentially had a worse fate. So they're horrible, horrible things. So if you are around the world, if you do spend any time in Maldives, I can highly recommend it. It's a beautiful country, and you do come across a ghost net. We ask if you are able to report it to us, because we spend a lot of time kind of collecting data on ghost nets, and it helps us to really find the source of them and get more information. The more information we have, the more we're able to tackle this problem and help sea turtles. So if you just go onto our website, there's information on how you can input information about the net, and potentially if you're out traveling in Maldives and there's people that don't know about this, you can let them know as well. So a little bit about Maldives. Maldives, it consists of 26 atolls. So these are coral atolls, sort of coral structures that have raised from the sea over centuries, and it sits north and south of the equator in the Indian Ocean. They speak the language called Devehi, which is a really unique language. It's a beautiful language that I tried to learn when I was there, and it's not spoken anywhere else. So it's a really, really unique language. The religion is Islam, so Muslims live there, which a lot of people are surprised about, because you see the resorts, but yeah, their natural culture is Islam. Their two sort of main sources of income would be tourism, so they have a huge number of tourists each year, and also through fishing. So I mentioned earlier that they sustainably fish tuna. They use a pole and line technique, which is really sustainable, because not only are they only catching tuna, but they only catch the large tuna. So the smaller fish they can throw back, which will then replenish the breeding stocks, and we don't end up in a world where we no longer have any fish to be able to fish. There's around 1,200 islands. Of this, there's about 140 resorts that you can visit, and about 200 uninhabited islands. So there's still a lot of wild sort of space there. And they have a population of around 400,000. And the climate is absolutely, skipped ahead a little bit there. The climate's absolutely lovely in Maldives, so can highly recommend it. It's about 30 degrees all year round. There's a wet and a dry season, but generally any time of year you go, you're going to get some sunny weather. So who are we as the Olive Ridley Project? So we are a UK registered charity, and our vision is to protect sea turtles and their habitats in the Indian Ocean. And we do this through various ways. So we rehabilitate injured turtles and release them to the ocean. We carry out research on sea turtles, ghost nets, lots of different areas, to aid our work. We carry out education and awareness projects, whether this is in Pakistan, to educate about ghost nets to prevent them getting into the ocean. Also in Maldives about sea turtle conservation. Oman and Kenya also do a lot of work. So one of the projects in Pakistan actually removes fishing line from the ocean, and they recycle this into donkey harnesses, dog leashes, clothing fabrics, jewelry. So we're trying to find alternate ways that ghost nets can be used so that they don't end up back in the ocean. And then in Oman and Kenya, we have turtle biologists that work to ID local turtle populations to gather more information. And they work closely with the environmental ministries there to raise awareness, in these Indian Ocean countries about sea turtle conservation. And then in Maldives, we have a turtle rescue centre, we have the main veterinary clinic, and we also have a second rehabilitation centre where we have extra tanks to send turtles for ongoing care and before their release. We also have marine biologists working in various atolls, collecting nesting data, working on education projects and awareness, and just lots of work to try and tackle the problem from all different angles. So just, some more examples that we find, some turtles that have been found floating in Maldives. So this is a view sort of our veterinary clinic, where we have surgical facilities, X-ray, ultrasound, rehabilitation tanks to actually be able to rescue them. So a bit more about the project in Maldives. So we actually opened the first ever veterinary clinic in the country to provide veterinary care to turtles. We have a site at Coca Pond in Ikolu, also at Kuradu Resort and Six Senses. We have turtle biologists, and in Lamu, one and only resorts as well, we have turtle projects that work in the Maldives. And then they're involved as well with our Turtle ID project, which I have a little game in a minute at the end of this presentation. So Pakistan as well, I mentioned previously, we have projects over there working with fishermen to help tackle the problems of ghost gear. Oman and Kenya, those are our locations as well where we're currently based, and we're constantly working to expand where we are, and even in the last couple of years we're already working in more places, and spreading awareness and education, and researching and finding as much information about turtles as possible. So a bit about code of conduct for turtles. If you are fortunate enough to be able to dive with turtles, and I really hope everyone watching will be able to see a turtle in the wild at some point if you haven't already. So just respect them basically in the environment. This goes for all marine life. We're talking about turtles, but most of this information applies to most marine life we're going to encounter when we're diving or snorkeling with them. try not to disrupt the turtle in its environment. So, you know, if they're eating, if they're enjoying a little afternoon snack, try not to get too close to them. Try and remain 2 meters away from them at all times. Don't get right in front of their face. Try not to put, you know, cameras in their face, or you know, get too close to them, as this might scare them. They might injure us. You know, we just don't want to disturb them. Try and approach them from the side. This allows them to see you properly, and you'll have the most chance of the turtle kind of sticking around and being able to, you know, swim with them and enjoy the environment with them. If we sneak up on them or we chase them, we're just going to end up driving them away. And please do not touch sea turtles. They can, you know, they can bite, but also they're a wild animal, and we should really respect wildlife and marine life, and just enjoy watching them, sharing their environment with them, and taking lots of photos. There are unfortunately some places where they say you can touch turtles. I was actually in Maldives having a little holiday away from the centre, and when a really lovely and well-meaning guide was so excited, he found out I was a sea turtle vet, and he wanted to show me a turtle. So we were out snorkeling, and he dived down and he actually picked up a turtle and brought it to the surface. And I was shocked and horrified, and, you know, quickly explained, like, please don't ever do that. And it's often just this lack of awareness. It's not a nasty thing. I think a lot of people just don't realize that, you know, we shouldn't be touching marine life, whether that's, you know, sharks, whales, turtles. You know, we just need to leave them be. So please don't pet them. Please just enjoy watching them. Finally, please don't swim directly on top of them. So turtles need to come up to breathe air. So you can imagine if you were swimming at the bottom of the pool and someone started swimming above you and you felt like you couldn't get up for your breath. So just respect, you know, respect this part of them as well. So yeah, again, sort of if you're taking a photograph, same advice as before, remain a couple of meters away, don't chase them, approach them from the side and not from behind. This is so that they can see you, and you'll get the best chance of actually getting a good photo of them. And of course, give them space when they're coming to breathe. If you do encounter a turtle when you're in the Maldives, and you want to contribute to our citizen science research, which is where everyone sends us pictures of turtles, if you're able to get a picture of both sides of their face and send it to us, we can tell you who that turtle is, you know, a bit more information on them, and you can also have the chance to adopt that turtle that you've seen, to get sort of future sightings of where they are. If you find a new turtle for our database, you can actually name them as well. So it's quite an exciting thing to be able to name your turtle. So some things we do is, you know, trying to estimate size. You can actually use parts of your body to try and estimate the size of their shell, and we collect data on, you know, whether that's a juvenile or an adult. And we just, when we're keeping records of turtles in the wild, you know, we use the scoots on the side of their face to identify them. So the side of a turtle's face is like a human fingerprint. It's completely unique. So no two turtles will have the same pattern of scales on their face, and this actually allows us to identify turtles. So when we keep records, we have one of the largest databases of photo ID turtles in the world, and we track them not with tags, you know, not with chips or anything like that, but with this really non-invasive method of taking photos. And people, when they see turtles in, you know, Maldives, but also with our biologists in Kenya and Oman, they actually take photos of both sides of their face and they compare it with the database, and they go, oh yes, that's so-and-so who's been on this reef for the last 4 years. And we can gather data about, you know, whether the juveniles are on the same reefs as adults, survival rates, you know, loads of different information. So if you are, you know, in one of the areas we're working and you see a turtle, please take some pictures of their face safely and send it to us, and we'll be able to ID them. So a little bit of a game. Unfortunately, I can't see anything other than this presentation screen, so I can't see the comment section till the end. So what I'll do is just explain the game, and you guys can have a look and see if you can identify this turtle, and maybe write in the comments if you got it right or not. So basically, the turtle in the middle is the turtle we're trying to identify. So you need to look at the pattern of the scales on the side of the face and then actually match whether you think it's, you know, turtle 1 to 6. So have a little look. If you haven't done so already, I think you can double click on the screen to, you know, make it a larger view if the presentation has been small. So I'll just leave you a few minutes to see if you can match this game. Okay, and then so this one, the actual answer was picture number 2. So that was the turtle that's in the middle. So well done to everyone that got that right. We have one more game as well, one more little identification challenge. If you can match the turtle that's in the photo in the middle. Okay, so those of you that might have got it right, is actually picture number 1. So this is how it works, the sea turtle ID that we carry out as part of our research. We're literally just matching photos. And I think one of our lead scientists, Jill Hudgens, is actually working on software to be able to do this automatically. So I'm going to finish up this presentation by just talking about what you can do at home to help us. So one of the things is to reduce single-use plastic consumption. So things like reusable shopping bags, water bottles, you know, anything you can do. If you're in the supermarket and you see that there's apples in a plastic bag versus loose apples, please go for the apples that aren't wrapped in plastic. And this sounds, you know, like really small things, and it's the kind of thing where you think, well, how much can one person make a difference? But when we're talking about, you know, 4 billion people in the world, and everyone's saying that, well, you know, that's how we're in the state of the world that we're in. So just be really conscious and aware of the amount of plastic you're using in your day-to-day life. During my time in Maldives, I encountered a turtle that was entangled in just 2 plastic bottles. And she lost a flipper because of those bottles. And it really shocked me, because I thought, gosh, you know, there's been days where you could easily, one person, use 2 plastic bottles if you're out and about and you need a drink. So it's just really about being conscious of what we're using, and you know, bringing drinks with us and being as prepared as possible. Please eat only sustainably sourced fish. So ideally reduce the amount of fish you're eating. And, you know, it's a balance. It's not saying that, you know, you shouldn't ever eat fish, but just be very conscious about where it's coming from. Buy sustainably caught fish that's been caught not using fishing nets. Do some research about, you know, the products that are out there. There are labels that will let you know if it's sort of sustainably caught. And, you know, sort of don't be afraid to ask, really, if you're in questions, if you're in restaurants, you know, maybe where they're getting their fish from. Spread the message about, you know, conservation and the work that not only us, but maybe other charities you're encountering as well. And just really get back into nature and enjoy, you know, what you love. So I presume the majority of people watching and listening are, you know, interested in diving. So all of us here love the ocean. We love experiencing marine life. And I think that's what drives our passion to really protect it, because if we love seeing, you know, marine life in their natural environment, it gives us a real drive to try and do something to help them, because we want our marine life to be around for the next few generations, so our grandchildren and great-grandchildren can enjoy our oceans. So enjoy it, you know, spread the message, because from, you know, from our passion for things drives that need to protect it. You can also, you know, locally support your local beach cleanups, and, you know, trying to do little things at home by offsetting travel miles. Lots of different things. If you have any questions, or, you know, if there's anything you want to know about this presentation or how you can help, then please get in touch and leave some comments. So finally, how can you support us as a charity? We are completely reliant on donations to keep protecting turtles, rehabilitating them, and, you know, tackling ghost scare and threats against them in the wild. So please, if you could donate, that would be absolutely incredible. I know it's really difficult times at the moment that we're all experiencing, but it's an even more critical time. So any amount of pennies would go a really long way. We have an adopted turtle scheme. So it's coming up to Christmas. So if you're running out of Christmas ideas, you can go on a website, you can adopt a turtle for someone or yourself, treat yourself, and you will get a certificate and updates on that turtle. You know, we'll let you know how they're doing, and when they get released, you know, you'll be involved sort of in the whole process. So it's a lovely thing to do. You can volunteer with us. We do have a volunteer program. Hopefully when, you know, we're out of this corona situation, you might be able to join us in Maldives. You can actually go out and visit our rescue centre, work with us, learn more about turtles, and just spend some time seeing turtles. Please follow us on social media and check out our website. We have a huge amount of information on there. And thank you very much. I hope you've been able to see this presentation, and I will stick around for any questions.
Hi, Claire. Good afternoon. Good morning.
Hi.
Hi. I have a couple of questions. Thank you for the presentation. I was watching yesterday the presentation from Joanna, but I missed the beginning, so that's why I jumped into that one. And I have a couple of questions. Like my first one is, you mentioned that, of course, not having as a pet a turtle. Is there any regulation, especially in Europe, for pet shop, for example, to make sure people don't buy sea turtle, or to make sure the pet shop doesn't buy or end up with a sea turtle as a pet?
Yeah. So you're completely right. I think mostly what I'm talking about is the illegal pet trade. So there's a huge amounts of regulation. So even where I was working in Maldives, it is illegal to keep turtles as pets, but unfortunately it still happens. So yes, you know, in Europe we have really great animal protection laws. It's hopefully not as much of a problem, but it still happens because people see them, they think they're so cute, they want to take them. Equally, in some parts of the world, they can be, you know, worth a bit of money, being sold on black markets and things, so they are kind of taken illegally from the wild. So part of the way we combat this is really through education, because laws are fantastic. You know, we need laws to protect animals, but we also need more than that. So yes, there are laws that say we can't take turtles from the wild and keep them as pets, but it's often not enough. So we need to, you know, work to try and raise awareness so people don't want to take them. They understand that they're better in the wild.
Yeah. Because at certain time, maybe 10 years, I don't know if it still happened, but people used to buy turtle, but I don't know if it was sea turtle or tortoise, but they end in the drain of people, and they used to be, and they used to grow and grow. It was not the case in the UK at certain point. I don't know. It was something that everybody wanted a turtle at home. Maybe 10.
I mean, we don't really see sea turtles in the UK. We're a bit too cold to have sea turtles here, but we do have a problem with freshwater turtles.
Yeah, but from importation, you know, humans are so stupid, they don't even check which kind of
Yeah,
turtle they have
yeah.
sometimes.
But yes, yeah, no, you're right to say there are laws, but it's not something we see in the UK. But definitely when I was working in Maldives, we would get a lot of pets that would be handed over to us. And often they didn't even know the law. So there was a law, but people didn't know it was a thing. So when they found out, many people would actually, pass them over and sort of anonymously hand us these pet turtles.
Okay. And how smart is the turtle? Because I'm living in the Bahamas. I'm running a little resort. I'm still learning about turtle. I mean,
Yeah.
we are learning every day about everything. And as a diver, I really want to develop my knowledge about sea turtles. And I realize when we go diving and we see the turtle, we are not really close. I never chase any animals. I hate that, and I hate when people are doing it, especially to take
Mm-hmm.
the special shots. Um, but when they see us, they swim away, but crazy. I mean, before I used to live in another part of the Caribbean, and they were super friendly. So is it because of human presence? Are they smart? Like they recognize, okay, you chase me, you kill some of my families or whatever. So that's why they run away. Are
Yeah,
they
I
as
mean, there's so many
smart
forms of
like this?
intelligence, and I think, I mean, comparing against human intelligence, I think is never, we can't compare that kind of thing. But in terms of an animal that survived 120 million years in the ocean, they're incredibly smart about recognizing threats and avoiding them. So we've definitely encountered it. I mean, even within Maldives, we'll have areas where poaching doesn't really happen and the turtles are very friendly, so you can swim next to them and they're not fussed about human presence. And then particularly where I was working in my atoll, they were really heavily poached, and it was very hard to get near them because they did recognize. So although it's hard to judge, okay, intelligence and how quickly they learn, but I mean, definitely, I think when it comes to their lives, if they've been chased once, or they're aware about that, they are starting to adapt and avoid people in those areas where they are poached quite regularly.
Yeah, because here I think it's probably the same in the Maldives. So I'm in the Bahamas. So now it's illegal, but some, is that what I was telling Joanna yesterday, but some are still
Mm-hmm.
killing them, hunting them. So I was wondering if that's why maybe they are scared and they know.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure there's been any sort of scientific research at the moment as to, how well they're adapting to the threats of people. But just, anecdotally, definitely, I feel that there's areas where they're very shy. And also, potentially those areas with those populations, the ones that weren't shy were hunted, and were eaten by people. So the ones that were less shy are the only ones that are alive still at the moment. So potentially it's our kind of natural selection on those
Yeah.
turtles, that the friendly ones in those areas were unfortunately poached, and the ones that were more shy and wary of humans are the ones that survived.
Okay.
Oh, that's what I'm here
Sorry,
for.
I
It's
have
fine.
a question. So you were talking about the hawksbills that they are eating a
Yes.
toxic algae that may be toxic for them, and by eating it, can they transmit
Yeah,
any
definitely.
disease to humans?
Yeah.
By if we
So
touch
the
them,
food to them
for
isn't
example,
toxic.
or
That's their natural diet. So they're eating these toxic sponges, corals, things off the reef. But it can then, make their meat sort of toxic to people. So there's lots of different ways. They can have a high concentration of heavy metals in their body, and they can have different bacteria that's very toxic to people. So there have been mass food poisoning acts in places like India, where many people have developed food poisoning, and many probably lost their lives from eating turtle meat. And it's mainly the hawksbills that become so poisonous to people because of their diet. They have such a varied diet that one turtle, you know, may have lower amounts of toxins and chemicals, but another turtle may have a lot of toxins and chemicals within their body. So that's why it's really a hit and miss when someone eats a turtle as to whether they're going to get sick or whether they're not going to get sick.
Sorry, I could not hear you. My dog start to bark. By touching them, you said there is an issue? Okay.
By eating the meat. So in parts of the world where it's still in the culture to eat turtle meat, that's how people get sick and they get food poisoning. They do. So reptiles in general carry like salmonella bacteria on their skin. It's part of their natural flora. Okay. So I mean, technically, yes. If we were to touch a turtle or lick a turtle, then you know we can get some of those kinds of diseases from them.
Yeah, but then if you wash just your hand, you're fine, right?
Yeah. So when we were working with them in rehabilitation, we just would wash our hands a lot, and we were, you know, absolutely fine. We'd handle them a lot for surgeries and rehabilitating them, and you know, they are safe to work with. Yes.
Okay. No, because sometimes I found one on the beach. She was still alive, so I just get the time to because she just hands to the beach. She was not able, I don't know why, but I tried to check, but she could not get back to the water. So I just carry her quickly because it was so hot that day. And that's why, and then I washed my hand, but I was wondering if they could, so you said the salmonella, but can we also contaminate or give them some disease? I mean, both ways, or they're
I mean,
with the water, it does not transmit that much.
It's definitely a theory. So there was one. There was a place in, I think, the Cayman Islands that were breeding turtles and for meat, but also to sort of release them. And there's a lot of places that will do kind of Head Start programs. So you raise turtles in captivity. So when they get to sort of 1-2 years old, they're then released to the wild. But one of the concerns is, you know, turtles shouldn't ever encounter humans. So we have completely different bacteria on our skin. We carry different viruses. So are we introducing bacteria to them that they can pass on to wild populations and potentially have unknown consequences? So it's a really good question, and you're right that, you know, we're so different that yes, potentially. I don't have any proof. There's currently no evidence out there, but potentially we could be passing bacteria to them that they could then pass on bacteria to, you know, other turtles. In captivity, you know, they tended to be fine. We didn't see any problems. They already came in with horrific wounds, and we don't think we sort of contaminated them. But it's definitely something to think about, and I think definitely an area that research could be carried out in. You know, captive bred turtles that are then released. Does that cause harm to wild populations? I think it's very interesting.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
For answering.
Yeah. Okay, I'm just going through some of the lists. There's quite a lot of questions.
Yeah, I think it's the question that I asked here.
Oh, yes. Oh, I just saw that you did our e-learning lessons. That's something I forgot to mention.
Yeah.
Yes. That's a new thing we've got with producing e-learning section on the website.
It's really nice. Honestly, I started yesterday, and it's really interesting.
Yeah.
And it was like stupid things. But even as a diver, I didn't know that because the sea turtle is flat and she couldn't retract the head.
Yes.
I thought they could.
Yeah.
I talked to my partner. I said, "Did you know that?" I said, "No." Okay. Well, now you know. But it's all these kind of things that we don't really know. You know?
Yeah. So they've adapted to sort of being able to swim. They're really streamlined and water dynamic. So they've lost the ability, to retract the head. Yeah.
No, the course is really well done, and I'm going to go through again because I didn't have the time. I'm on an exhibitor too. So.
Yeah.
But the website is really nice.
Yeah.
And I have a question that yesterday I was wondering, and I forget to ask Joanna, and what was it? Yeah, because we were talking about nesting, and she told me that you will have to check on the beach pretty often. And there is a kind of place they like. I mean, if there are any natural environment that she check on it to make a nest, or it's random and wherever she find the place comfortable, then she will nest.
Yeah, so they, depending on the species, so we found in Maldives sometimes the hawksbills would like to be kind of in the jungle. I had one nest working there, and it was in the middle of a jungle. I don't know how she got there. We watched her come up the beach and just go to the middle of the island. It was really incredible. But
Ah, okay.
they can make false crawls. So sometimes you'll see they'll come up, they'll start digging, and for whatever reason, they don't like that spot. So maybe the sand is wet, or it's not great sand, or some reason that they know naturally that that's not a good place to lay eggs. So they will find a place that's suitable. And it tends to be quite high up on the beach near the tree line. Occasionally it is just in the middle of the beach, and we can tell when it's about to hatch because you tend to see like a little dip kind of within 24 hours. So we'll just keep watching a nest, and you see a little dip and you think, oh, okay, and I now need to check sort of every hour, every half an hour that it's going to go.
Okay, there is no scientific way that find out how a turtle set a place for nesting.
Oh, good question.
Or,
I mean, I think just collecting a lot of data on where they are laying their nests, and potentially comparing those sites. That's something I'd have to look into actually to see if there's been any studies on, how they make their choices. I'm not sure if any of our turtle biologists in the comments have any, answers for that. But yeah, I'm not sure actually how they choose it. Just kind of,
okay.
yeah. There might be some studies out there.
Because I'm, as I said, I'm on a small island, and it's been 5 years. We are living on the beach. The hotel, the little resort is on the beach, but I've seen some turtle, but I haven't seen, and probably because we don't check every day. And with my partner, I told him, say, I'm sure they might nest somewhere, and that beach is so long, isolated. There is not a lot of human presence.
Yeah.
So I think it's might be a good place for them to nest. The only thing is the problem is plastic, unfortunately, because we are on the Atlantic side and we have a lot of plastic washed up.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the only thing I'm concerned, because that's what I was telling Joanna yesterday. We found twice this year a dead turtle, but we couldn't see if it was really plastic, because as she said yesterday in her presentation, sometimes they can eat plastic, but you don't see it unless you open the turtle and see in the stomach.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
It's really common. There was a study in Australia, and 90%, I think it was something like 95% of the dead turtles that washed up had plastic, like contained some kind of plastic in them. And yes, it's only the turtles that have dead and washed up, but it's scary to think that it's so common, and that many of them in the wild will at least eat some plastic.
what you recommend to do if we found a dead turtle? I mean, tell to someone who studied the turtle around the area, don't touch it, just leave it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know much about the Bahamas, to be honest, but there must be some charities that work with turtles. I think it would be really interesting if you maybe got in touch with them and see if they do collect data, because it's definitely something when we were working in Maldives. If someone reported a dead turtle to us, it's something we would record into our data, and we try and find out, why they died, and it's just all adds to information on the work.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But I know someone, is that what I was saying to Joanna. I was just wondering what we should do. Leave it. I don't know. I mean, I was walking with my dog a few days after, and I think the bird just eat it,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and the worm.
Yeah, it's hard to know what to do. I mean, sometimes in Maldives we would sort of bury them or put them in the ocean, but I think, yeah, if it's somewhere wild, perhaps just leave it, or if there's anyone you can tell that might
Yeah.
want to get some information about it.
All right, cool. I asked my question. It was really interesting. Thank
No
you.
problem at all. It was nice to meet you.
Okay.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.